Retro Road Test Renault Clio vs Peugeot 205, 1991. In the early 1990s, the European small car market was buzzing with energy. Hot hatches, city runabouts, and clever little shopping cars were all the rage, and French manufacturers were at the very front of the game. If Britain's bread and butter car was the Ford Escort, then France's beating heart was divided between two stalwarts, the Peugeot 205, by 1991 already something of a modern classic, and the all-new Renault Clio, freshly introduced as the successor to the long-lived Renault 5. Both cars were pitched to the same audience, young professionals looking for stylish and affordable wheels, families needing a dependable second car, and enthusiasts who wanted lightweight handling without remortgaging the house. But how did the brand new Clio, fresh from the drawing board, compare to the slightly more mature but deeply beloved Peugeot 205? To find out, we spent time behind the wheel of both. Styling and design. Renault Clio. The Clio arrived in Britain in 1991 with big shoes to fill. The Renault 5 had been quirky, popular, and distinctly French. The Clio, however, represented a shift to a more modern and refined look. Out went the soft, bulbous curves of the 5 and in came cleaner, square lines that were unmistakably of the early 1990s. The Clio looked tidy, grown up even, while still being compact. The headlamps were broad and confident, the grille understated, and the bodywork smooth without looking bland. Renault's design department clearly wanted the Clio to feel more European than just French, and in that sense, it hit the brief. Inside, the Clio felt reasonably sophisticated for the time. The dashboard was clean and modern, switchgear logically arranged, by French standards at least, and the overall ambience suggested Renault wanted you to feel as though you had bought into something more upmarket than a simple city car. Peugeot 205. By 1991, the 205 was already 8 years into its life. And yet, it still looked fresh. Pininfarina's design had aged gracefully, its simple proportions and balanced stance giving it a timelessness few small cars could boast. If the Clio was modern, the 205 was effortless stylish, less a haircut of the season, more a well-tailored jacket that never went out of fashion. The 205's cabin was perhaps its weakest point by comparison. The dashboard was a slab of hard plastic, the ergonomics occasionally haphazard, and some switches looked as though they had been borrowed from an early 1980s washing machine. But there was a charm to it. The thin pillars and airy glass house gave the driver a marvelous view out, something the Clio's chunkier design slightly compromised. Verdict: the Clio looked modern and refined, while the 205 carried an elegance that time had yet to diminish. If you valued freshness, the Clio scored. If you valued enduring style, the 205 was your car. Engines and performance. Renault Clio. In 1991, British buyers could choose a variety of engines in the Clio, from a humble 1.2-litre carburetted unit producing 55 bhp to more spirited offerings like the fuel-injected 1.4 RT with 80 bhp. Renault also launched the hot hatch Clio 16V with its 137 bhp 1.8-litre twin-cam, though that was aimed at a different buyer altogether. Our focus here is the mainstream variants, the 1.2 and 1.4 petrols. The 1.2 was adequate around town but struggled to keep pace on motorways, feeling breathless when pushed beyond 60 miles per hour. The 1.4, however, was a sweet spot, offering enough pep for overtaking, a willingness to rev, and a refinement that made longer journeys palatable. Peugeot 205. The Peugeot 205 offered a similar spread. The entry-level models used the long-serving 1.0 and 1.1 petrol engines, while the 1.4 and 1.6 units provided stronger performance. In addition, Peugeot was ahead of its time with diesel engines in small cars, offering 1.8 and 1.9-litre diesels that, while no rockets, delivered superb fuel economy. Like the Clio, the sweet spot in the 205S lineup was the 1.4. Producing around 75 bhp, it had a lively character, aided by the car's light weight, around 850 kilograms. The 205 felt slightly keener than the Clio, in part because it carried less bulk and in part because its engines had a wonderfully free-revving nature. Verdict: the Clio was smooth and modern, the 205 lively and eager. Both were pleasant, but the Peugeot just edged it for sheer fun, particularly in the mid-range petrol models. Ride and handling. Renault Clio. Renault engineered the Clio to ride like a bigger car. Its suspension was relatively soft, absorbing potholes and speed bumps with aplomb. Around town it felt composed, more grown-up than its size suggested. On the motorway, it tracked straight and true, with decent refinement for a supermini. However, this comfort came at a cost. The Clio wasn't as sharp in corners as the Peugeot. The steering was light but slightly numb, and while the chassis was competent, it lacked the playful balance of its rival. The Clio felt safe and predictable rather than exuberant. Peugeot 205. This is where the 205 truly shone. Even in modest trims, the handling was sublime. Light, communicative steering gave the driver a sense of connection with the road, and the chassis balance was near perfect. The 205 felt nimble, alive, and genuinely fun, whether threading through city traffic or attacking a twisty B-road. The trade-off was ride comfort. The 205 was firmer, and over broken surfaces it could feel jittery. On long motorway hauls, it transmitted more noise and vibration into the cabin than the Clio. But enthusiasts forgave all of this for the sheer joy of the drive. Verdict: comfort. The Clio. Thrills. The 205. Practicality and space. Renault Clio. Renault had clearly thought hard about practicality. The Clio offered a surprisingly spacious interior for its size, with decent headroom and a usable rear seat for adults, at least on shorter trips. The boot was generous, squarely shaped, and easy to load. Split folding rear seats came as standard on many trims, adding versatility. Cabin storage was better than in the 205, with useful cubbies and a glove box that actually lived up to its name. The Clio felt like a small family car in miniature. Peugeot 205. The 205 was slightly smaller inside, particularly in the rear, where legroom was tight. The boot was adequate but not as practical as the Clio's. Cabin storage was virtually non-existent, a shallow glove box and a door pocket if you were lucky. That said, the 205's upright seating position and airy glass house made it feel less claustrophobic than it was. You couldn't fit as much shopping in it, but it gave you the illusion of space. Verdict: no contest. The Clio was more practical and versatile. Equipment and value. Renault Clio. By 1991 standards, the Clio was well equipped. Higher trims offered electric windows, central locking, and even power steering, luxuries unheard of in many small cars just a few years earlier. The interiors felt solid and reasonably plush, especially in RT and TX trims. Renault also priced the Clio competitively. It wasn't the cheapest small car on sale, but the equipment and refinement justified the sticker. buyers felt they were getting value. Peugeot 205. The 205, being an older design, felt Spartan by comparison. Basic models were just that, basic. Wind-up windows, manual locks, and no hint of power assistance unless you paid for it. By 1991, Peugeot had started to improve specifications in some trims, but overall the 205 still felt rooted in the early 1980s in terms of kit. On the flip side, Peugeot offered an enormous variety of trims, from bargain basement junior models to plush GT trims, so buyers could find something that suited their wallet. Verdict: the Clio was more modern and generous with toys. Reliability and running costs. Renault Clio. Being new, the Clio hadn't yet established a long-term reputation in 1991. Renault's reliability record was historically patchy, but the Clio seemed decently screwed together compared to its predecessors. Servicing costs were modest, and fuel economy respectable, around 40 miles per gallon from the 1.2 and mid-30s from the 1.4. Insurance groups were reasonable too, especially compared to the hot hatch variants. Peugeot 205. By contrast, the 205 had years of proven reliability behind it. Its engines were hardy, its parts cheap and plentiful, and mechanics everywhere knew them inside out. The diesels in particular were legendary for longevity, often running to Starship mileages if maintained. Fuel economy was excellent across the range, especially in the diesel models that could manage 50 miles per gallon without trying. Insurance was slightly higher than the Clio in some trims, owing to the 205's popularity among young drivers and the associated accident statistics. Verdict: the 205 had proven durability on its side, while the Clio offered modern efficiency but less of a track record. On the road, a tale of two drives. The Renault Clio was a car you could recommend to your parents without hesitation. Comfortable, practical, modern, and civilized. It felt safe, secure, and mature. On a motorway run from London to Birmingham, the Clio would be your friend, refined enough to make the miles pass without drama, practical enough to swallow the luggage, and modern enough to give you confidence. The Peugeot 205 was a car you recommended to your mates when you wanted a laugh. Nimble, communicative, and brimming with character. On a twisting B-road across the Cotswolds, the 205 would light up your day. It wasn't as refined, wasn't as comfortable, and wasn't as practical. But it made you grin in a way few small cars could. Humor break. Let's put it this way, the Clio was the sensible mate who remembered to bring sandwiches on a road trip. The Peugeot 205 was the mischievous one who forgot the sandwiches but nicked 3 packets of crisps from the service station and made you laugh all the way there. Both good company, just in very different ways. Conclusion. By 1991, the Peugeot 205 was already a legend. It had defined the small car sector, brought joy to millions of drivers, and offered everything from frugal diesels to fire-breathing GTs. The Renault Clio, meanwhile, was the new kid on the block, modern, refined, and practical, pointing the way towards the future of superminis. If you wanted a safe, comfortable, versatile small car, the Clio was the one to buy. If you wanted a car that stirred your soul and made every drive an adventure, the 205 was irresistible. Ultimately, the choice came down to head versus heart. The Clio appealed to the rational buyer, the Peugeot to the emotional one. And in that sense, both cars did exactly what they were supposed to. They captured the spirit of early 1990s motoring, each in their own unique French way.